And what an audience! Of course, the star that brings them in here is known as the wolf. We got a supporting actor, Doug Smith, is back, and a few others of us going to say a few things as we get the evening going here. But let's see, little housekeeping details. There was, in the middle of all this, I have a sheet afterwards. If you're not on the mailing list, you'd like to be on the mailing list, get your name onto it, so I've got it. Who ended up with the book tonight? Anybody tell me where the book is? Okay, Linda, will you keep hold of that for now? Okay, and that's there, and I think that gets most of the details. There's a wolf by the name of 1104F. Who's that wolf? What's that wolf represent? It's a 7th generation wolf. 7 generations since 25 years ago they came in that truck through the arch. 7 generations. And in wolf years, turns out that the average generation's been 3.5 years or so approximately, that for the wolves. When I came here, Yellowstone, started running operations in 1970. I started meeting the most wonderful people in the world. And a large number of them are sitting in this room right now. 1995, that number, instead of just going up a little bit, started to skyrocket as people came in. And over time, there's been 7 generations of wolves. There's been 4 generations of people. I want to introduce you to the 4 generations of people tonight. The first generation are the warrior people. And there aren't many of them here tonight. The warriors are the ones that made it possible for you to be here tonight. These are the ones that fought the battle that brought the wolves in here. Second generation, we call the reintroduction generation. I like to call them rather the colonizers. These are the ones that arrived with the wolves, and some of them have stuck clear through today. And then we've got the supporter generation. I call them the peakers. They were at the peak of the population, and one thing that distinguishes them is they don't know some of the folks that were here before that. And then we have the pup generation, and that is our new generation of folks that weren't alive when the wolf came in. They're the ones that I treat with great respect because they're going to carry the torch forward. And so let me tell you just a little bit about the warrior generation. A lot of them are forgotten now. A lot of folks in this room don't know who they were, don't remember the names. I started kind of tallying and kind of gave up on it. I'm going to mention a few key names tonight. First one is Molly Beatty. Yes. Molly put her political career on the line and signed to bring the wolves in and carried the first wolf in. A year later, Molly was dead from cancer, brain cancer. Molly's mom and I spent some good times together, and she was one of the warrior class that was here. Another one is Ann, name just escaped me. Help me, Ann, number 8. Whitbeck, Ann Whitbeck. A lot of the people in this room know Ann Whitbeck, and she was definitely one of them. But Diane, where's Diane sitting?
You made her stand outside.
Oh, there she is. Diane and I sat in the hospital with people from our warrior group and our colonizer group as they died, and we tried to remember the names, and to the life of us, names have gone with the years, but they're people you didn't get to meet that were here. The first people that were here was when we started. Now with the warrior generation, I brought in just some of the paperwork that was over here. There are people in this room that slaved over every single word in volume after volume of EISs, ecological issues, the Yellowstone National Park, and these were very critical things to us having the wolves here today. And I want to introduce you to one of those people in particular. His name's Hank Fisher. If you haven't read Hank's book, this is a must, because it tells you what went on in the warrior days. 1984, I started advocating for wolves in my classes at the Yellowstone Institute. And through the years, late 80s into 90s, besides letter writing, lots of folks went to meetings where we didn't know if we'd walk out in one piece from those meetings. And Hank chronicles all of this in the Wolf Wars. And I kind of break that whole series into 3 things. One's the congressional part. And the second part is the sheep and cattle ranchers, and the third part, Section 10J. Now, the first part there, Congress, we were lost, folks. There weren't going to be any wolves here. The representatives, the senators, the governors of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, they weren't going to introduce or push for introduction of any bill in our Congress. One person stepped up. Owens, Senator Owens from Utah, stepped up, crossed the boundary lines, and introduced the legislation for us to get to bring wolves in. I can remember him speaking. Wright, Republican from Idaho. Idaho Republican for a wolf? Oh, come on, Jim, you got to be kidding me. He backed it up, and if we hadn't had him, we wouldn't have got this into Congress. And we all knew that there were going to be battles, and understood why there were battles. There were sheep and cattle ranchers who were afraid for their livelihood, and I don't really blame them for that. But it was up to us to work with them as the public. And we looked at ecological issues, we looked at estimates of how many, scientists sit down and developed estimates of how many cattle, how many sheep would be killed when we reached the peak of the wolf reintroduction, and we never quite hit that number. But the surprising one is the bottom one there. You would have thought there was a conservation community out there backing wolf restoration. Well, the biggest fight of all developed within the conservation community there. If we brought the wolves in as an endangered species, we could have the rancher down the road, and that rancher down the road's daughter, who she's raised 11 months, the 4-H sheep, the wolf comes in and tears apart. There's a piece over there, a piece over there, a piece over there, yep, there's another piece over there, and that rancher couldn't do anything about it. One astute person read down that Endangered Species Act, clear down there to Section 10, over, and clear down there to Section J. And there was a thing called experimental non-essential. Experimental non-essential meant we could bring wolves in with management policies that would allow ranchers to protect themselves, that would allow a rancher to shoot a wolf on his property that was going after his livestock. Since day one, that rancher's had the right to shoot a wolf. But here's the problem. Ed Bangs told me one time, wolf restoration, the greatest experiment of the 20th century, greatest wildlife experiment, generated 167,000 letters. Ed said about half of them were against bringing wolves in, about half of them were for, and there was only one letter that said he was doing the right thing. And Ed still loves his mother. We weren't winning the battle until we found that Section 10J, but it split the conservation community in half. Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, Sierra Club, National Wildlife Federation, all wanted us to bring in wolves with every bit of protection that the Endangered Species Act gave them. The other half of us over here, we were looked at and saying, we ain't going to get this done unless we compromise a little bit. Let's go Section 10J. Well, that brought up battles. I still have a couple of friends today that we don't talk about, basically about a year in there during that time. So those were the three parts. And you know, we could step back and we could say, hey, what date should we be celebrating tonight? There's a lot of dates up there. I threw in some of the key ones. 1935, Yellowstone National Park ended predator control. Hey, that sounds like something we ought to celebrate. 1940, there was a Yellowstone biologist who looked at things in very simple terms. He said, hey, we broke this ecosystem, let's fix it. A few years later, 1944, Aldo Leopold took up the torch, and you all probably know Aldo's story about watching the live fade from his wolves. 1973, we got an Endangered Species Act. 1975, appointed the Rocky Mountain Wolf Recovery Team. John Weaver studies around Yellowstone, 1978, said we have no wolves left. We did find wolves in Yellowstone Park, but we never found a breeding pack. That's a whole other thing there. First recovery plans in 1980. David Meach, International Wolf Center, by 1986 was publicly on the campaign to help us try to get wolves back in. 1987, that's the key year. That's when Wayne Owens stepped up and said, hey, you senators, representatives, governors, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, you're wrong. I am going to go to Congress with this bill. And he started the legislation. 1990, the parks published their first studies. The key element from the citizen side was Defenders of Wildlife stepping in and saying, we will pay ranchers or any loss of livestock. And they created what we now know as the Bailey Fund. Linda was very active in working with the Bailey Fund. In fact, did you actually write some of the payment checks?
No, I visited ranchers.
You visited
and
ranch-
Yeah, worked with them.
1994, final EIS. January 12th. I was up on the south side of that road over there, and there were about 25 kids over on the other side, and this truck comes through with a horse trailer full of the wolves. Well, we had a program here, last program on ravens, some of you may have been here. Afterwards, one of the women came over to me and she said, you know, I was one of those little kids there watching the other side. And it was so disappointing. All we saw was this horse trailer go by. We didn't even know there was a wolf in there. Okay? So there are a lot of celebrations that we could be doing tonight, but the 25th seems like it's a pretty good one. I kind of alluded to some of this stuff, the lawsuits that we had, where we had Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, National Audubon Society against the rest of us over on the other side. Second lawsuit was the Wyoming Farm Bureau and the Mountain States Legal Foundation. And the third lawsuit was Jim and Kat Urbicite from down on the Pinedale side of the Wind Rivers. Now, I grew up working with Jim and Kat's dad, outfitting in the Wind Rivers. And they were pretty firmly convinced against wolves. The judge looked at me and says, hey, you people that are in the conservation community don't want wolves the way they're coming in. You Farm Bureau people, you Urbikites, I'm going to put you all in one lawsuit. And we had one big lawsuit with that group of people in the same bed. Boy, was that something. Well, I think that's as far as I may take the lawyer side of the story right now. I do want to throw a list up there of names. Those in the front can probably see some of them, those in the back can't. I won't go through them all, but there were a lot of people there that were critical to you being sitting in this room tonight. And the best way to learn about that is, where'd my book go? Had it in my hand a minute ago. Wolf Wars. Where did this appear?
It was on the screen.
It's on the screen. That's right. Where's it? Where's it? This is the homework assignment for you folks. The Pup Generation. Anybody that hasn't seen it, get on Amazon. I want you to order this. The book is called Wolf Wars. It's by Hank Fisher. I want you to read chapter 13. Guess what the title of chapter 13 is? Wolf Wars. Gee, that's a coincidence. It'll give you a good summary of a lot of the stuff that it took to get you to this room tonight. And if you want to be someone that really knows the wolf restoration story, you got to know what's in this book. So highly recommend that. Let's buy Amazon out on that book. Let's see. What else we got going? Oh, there we go. Chapter 13, Wolf Wars. Now, the reintroduction generation, which I kind of call the colonizer generation, were the ones that arrived together. And I'm going to come back to them in just a minute. But many of those have already passed on, regretfully. If they haven't passed on, they still don't visit into Yellowstone. They showed a long-term commitment. And in this room is an incredible long-term commitment of a large number of folks that are involved here. The original agreement we had as we fought to bring in wolves was there'd be equal shrift between management, including law enforcement, research, and education, especially with the public end of things. And we started with that, a trend of things that's gone on. The trend of education developed into an industry that's hard to believe right now, which is the wolf interpretation industry. And all the different groups that come in as part of their programs here, they're teaching about wolves. We have an incredible research publication. Maybe Doug throw some number out at us, but how many research papers have come out of this project? Got a quick number?
200.
Over 100, 200. Okay. And the watcher cadre of people out there 365 days a year, from can't see in the morning to can't see every night, sharing their information with researchers and so on. And Bob Landis and others, I'll mention Bob though in his filming, And Bob couldn't be here tonight, but he asked me to pass on his best wishes to you. He's editing a new film in Texas, but he did provide some champagne for after Doug finishes tonight. And Deck I mentioned already. The supporter generation, the peak generation, these are the ones that arrived as our wolves drew into the numbers of 200, 250 wolves in the park, and an incredible group of people that has lasted on from that time. Long-term commitments. People moved in, they bought homes, they bought stores, they bought motels, they started businesses. They're still here, all because of the four-legged Canaan. And they developed the art of sharing the wolves. These are the people's wolves. The only reason we can be here is the people of the United States made it possible. And so they're sharing the people's wolves out there daily. Now we have the Pup Generation who's joined us. They weren't born when we brought the wolves through. But they're carrying on the torch. And every good thing sitting in this room, they're going to carry forward. And that's what we want. And I see one blushing Pup Generation person back there. This is the ones that we're looking forward to, folks. They've got to carry it forward. So here's what I'm going to do for the night. Let's see here. That's good enough there. We're going to... I'm going to call on the folks that were here, the colonizers of the warriors, and give them 2 minutes to tell a story about what's going on. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to call the senior statesman of the fight to bring the wolves in. His name is Norm Bishop. Norm has been in this battle longer than anybody. A lot of stories there. We're going to give him a good 5 minutes. And then Doug will take over. Doug says he needs about 30 minutes. Now I'm going to time these, because speaking for myself and others, I know there are several in this group that I will be calling that can be very vociferous on occasions. So I will limit it to 2 minutes, so we hopefully get out of here at some time. And if it's getting too hot in here, George, would you handle seeing a window or two opens there, somebody along there, next person back? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out, and I'm trying to eyeball through the audience to see who I know is here. And I'm going to start clearing the back with Mr. Jim Pico. He's kind of been in the background and hidden, but an asset to the whole thing. Jim, you get the first 2 minutes. Talk from there. Okay. Talk loud.
Oh, we already got it. Hi, good evening. My name's Jim Pico. I'm the park photographer in Yellowstone. And Jim had a great background on what happened and what led into those wolves coming through the arch 25 years ago. I like Mike Phillips' line. He called it a grand experiment. But think about just what it took to get those wolves here. All the documentation, the lawsuits, and all that. And then they had to go find some wolves in a different country, right? And they had to get them here alive. You know, then they had to set up a pen system that would house those wolves for about 6 weeks or so, 7, 8 weeks, and keep them alive. So, I mean, it's just incredible, all the work that went into it. I didn't do anything very hard or really made all that significant. I was a lucky guy who was the park photographer. So I got to take pictures. Public Affairs Office would call me and say, hey, go over here, we're doing this then, and I would snap, snap, snap. So I had it easy, I had it fun. It was one of the most exciting things in my time in Yellowstone. Photography was a little bit different then. We used film, and I can talk to folks later about what that is. But from a technology aspect, I mean, exposing an image wasn't easy. The exposure latitude on color transparency film was very narrow. And so you had to be right on. You couldn't fix it in Lightroom. Lightroom wasn't born yet. Autofocus existed, but only in kind of rudimentary forms. It wasn't all that it is today. So that was a big difference, and we had to wait, a week or so to get our shots back. And then 36 shots per roll. Something's going on, and it's, 35, 36. Okay, could everyone just stop and hold it? Well, no. So you quick reload and maybe a second camera and take it from there. Maybe a couple real quick stories. The first time walking into a pen with wolves running around. I guess it was gonna be safe. I was behind Doug, and I was gonna let the wolves take him, you know. There's not much meat on either one of them. And I said, Doug, what should I do? And he says, well, don't stand along the fence by the door. Like, I don't want to stand by the door. And he says, get out in the middle. And I said, really? And you know, he wasn't kidding. And he says, look where the track is packed down. The wolves would just pace and run around the outside of that fence. So that was a safe place to be. 2 minutes to go.
Doug McCartney,
Thank you.
you were here.
Not quite as exciting as Jim Pico's adventures, but yeah, I've been working here for about 5 years when they were reintroduced. And I was a fairly avid bear watcher at the time, so I had a scope and a tripod. And I was just going out into the park to recreate the week after they'd been released. And I was driving past Slough Creek turnoff and happened to look over, and there was a big herd of bison out on the flats. And I'm like, there's a couple young calves over there. That's kind of odd. And then I realized that those were actually all black wolves running around. And the bison were totally unaware. I mean, they had no clue that there were wolves in amongst them. And it had just snowed, so my trucks were the only ones on the road. And I got out, just parked the truck, middle of the road, wasn't worried about it pulled out. Back then there wasn't any traffic during the winter. So I got out, set up my scope, I'm watching them, having a grand old time. And of course up comes a reindeer. And much like now, they were like, you gotta move. I'm like, wanna see the wolves? You got wolves? we're checking out the wolves when the plow came by. Anyhow, we had a good time, and it was, as I say, the first week they were out, so that was kind of cool to get to see them right off.
Terry, back there. Gunther. You want to say?
Yeah, I was the bear management biologist back in '95 when they brought him in, and one of my duties was to clean up roadkill. So prior to the wolves arriving, I had all my bear traps full of roadkill, frozen, and then we used that to feed the wolves. And I was there when we brought the first pack into Crystal Creek pen. It was a lot of media and everything, and Molly Beatty and Babbitt and Finley. It was Jim Evanoff carried the first wolf in, and I helped carry the second wolf in. And then after we released the pack in Crystal Creek, all the media went home, and then me and some other technicians put the wolf packs in the other pens around the park. So it's pretty cool seeing the first wolves. I don't have any pictures because they wouldn't let anybody but Jim. Yeah. So, yeah, what I remember is being in the pen feeding them. It was about I think a 12-foot pen with a barbed wire overhang. And the first time I went in there with the food, the wolves were jumping and their heads were getting up over the top of the pen. It was really amazing.
Let's see, Jeff Henry, where did you disappear to?
I think he just walked
He jumped
out.
out the door a second ago.
Let's see. Who else in the back part? I can't see clear back there. Who else was here? Ashia.
I have a fun story from my first summer. I got here about 4 months after the wolves did, and not because of the wolves, just because I was desperate to get out of the situation I was in. I was working in the gift shop at Mammoth, and actually that first summer, there was an Idaho TV station that did a 5-part series on wolves, and one of the nights was on wolf marketing, so I got to be interviewed with a whole bunch of wolf keychains and T-shirts and stuff like that, and just what the public response was to that sort of thing. But back then they said, they're out there, but you'll never see them. We might hear them occasionally. So it's funny that 25 years later, I've been working as a guide. Very much a large part of my income and fun is taking folks out to see wolves. But the end of that first summer, it was in September, and a bunch of us were up on Swan Lake Flats, and I won't go into the details of what we were doing up there at close to midnight, but enjoying the stars. And there was a group of us up there partying, and there was 3 bull elk on either side, on 3 sides of us, that were bugling to each other, and a nighthawk making some of that trilling sound. And an owl that started hooting just across on the backside of Swan Lake, and a pack of coyotes set up a racket over at the base of Bunsen, and you could hear them yipping and, you know, maybe eating something. It sounded like a whole bunch of them. And then one wolf started howling. That was the first time I ever heard a wolf howl. And everything else shut up. And we all just started bawling. It was a really powerful moment. So who knew I'd be here 25 years later, but cool moment in my life.
Now, my Diane was here, but she doesn't want me to call on her. Got anything that
Yes, you did.
any story you would share?
Well, we used to do the wolf trips. We would take people through the park, Jim and I would, and I always took a separate vehicle with all the supplies. And this one time I had to go to the bathroom. We just passed Soda Creek, I think. And so I
Under a parking lot.
I let Jim get ahead with the people. And so I pulled over to the side of the road to
We
go to
have
the
the
bathroom.
radios ready to communicate back and
We
forth if
did,
we find them.
yeah. So I got out of the truck and started going down the incline. Halfway down, I stopped. There are 5 wolves staring at me. No more than 5 to 7 feet between us. Of course, I don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. But I did sit down, just sat there, and we just had this moment in time. They looked at me, I looked at them, no tension. It was just a magical moment. That happened so many years ago, but it's one of those moments that will be with me forever.
She does go to the bathroom. Nathan!
Well, I think in '95 I wasn't much of anything at the time. Maybe I was unemployed. I just finished a series of jobs working in other places, doing other fun biological work, and being unemployed, I thought, well, the best place to land for a while until I find my next thing was back in my folks' house, free rent, and it was in Yellowstone. So great place to end up, and it happened to be at the same time that the wolves had to just come into the park. And so I thought, well, I could maybe get involved with this while I see what the next thing is. And so I started volunteering at that time. And for the volunteers in the room, you might appreciate this. It was only $7 a day to work for the Wolf Project. And it's increased, I think, mightily since then.
It's
18,
15, 14.
15. It's more than double since my day. But that turned out to be a real game changer in my whole life, really, because certainly that led into a lot of other things. I think we were discovering the fact that you could observe wolves in the park. A lot of experts didn't think we would be able to even observe them as readily as we do. That led into a lot of research and observation for the project for Doug and his colleagues, and eventually some academic work that I did through the University of Alberta studying the wolves and elk. And I've always felt like that was a great honor to be among the very many people that have studied elk in Yellowstone Park going back to the 1930s or so, and that's just a legacy going forward. But I was among some of the studies that were here when their top predator was also in the ecosystem, and so that was interesting, although I didn't end up doing that. I was unemployed again and decided that maybe the thing to do, since everyone wanted to see wolves, was to guide people to see them and give them an educational opportunity to observe wolves in the park. And so, again, a pioneering effort to actually start what has become quite an industry now of an ecotourism industry that I would argue didn't exist 25 years ago. And not just the wolves, but the grizzly bears recovered then too, and so they're part of that. But essentially, I don't think there's guiding the way many of us in this room do today 25 years ago. It just didn't exist. It wasn't out there. So never left. Never found that next job other than staying right here in Yellowstone Park, and I couldn't be more honored to be in a room full of people that are here to commemorate that. So,
Linda, you got anything to add?
Yep, let's see here, gentlemen. Okay. So, wrote up some notes. On my first day of work, start, for the Wolf Project on April 1st, 1996, we opened the pin to the Druid Peak Pack above the Lamar Buffalo Ranch and to release the pack. And I can still hear Mike Phillips' voice booming over the radio. Get those wolves out now! In a huge voice. Because as Jim spoke about, there was a lawsuit that could have deemed the reintroduction unlawful. So we opened the doors and quickly took off down the hill, monitoring wolves. But of course, the signals didn't change, they didn't come out. You know, it took a while, you may have heard that story. Eventually they did, but it took a little while. And I just wanted to say to everyone here, could you imagine a Yellowstone now without wolves? A crazy thought, huh? Well, in those early years, it was pretty rough. Gardiner was a different place prior to wolf reintroduction and during the early years of the wolf reintroduction. So wolves didn't just change the ecosystem, they changed the human social structure of this area as well, I'd like to submit. The return of the wolves changed the culture through the people that moved here, like a lot of you guys that are here this evening, and this gave the animals a voice. It allowed people that lived here to openly care about animals, our furry brethren, I'll say, in a way that wasn't quite as accepted before. So in the early years of the wolf introduction, Nathan, my husband, who grew up here, didn't feel safe openly declaring that he appreciated wolves being back on the landscape. And that always blew me away. But I understood. I mean, I felt that hostility as well. So it was somewhat of a hostile social environment back then. Wolves have been an agent of change then, not just for the ecosystem, but also for the social climate. I think about the newsletter that comes out every week still today, and the fake news, I'll call it, that was printed weekly about how wolves were going to decimate the elk population within a couple of years, you know, based on biased calculations that the people that were writing at the time were putting out there. I think about winter-killed ungulates, and what it felt like to see zombie elk and deer and bison walking around during this time of the year that you could essentially walk up to and push over, and they'd fall over dead by the hundreds. It was a really tough thing to see. Reminiscing about these changes over the past 25 years gives me hope for the future if we all continue to use our voice to speak up for wildlife.
Now, standing up front, looking down into this cloud of faces like you can't see mine very well, I don't mean to skip anybody that was a warrior or colonizer that was here during that first semester from the reintroduction to summer. So is there anybody else that wants to add something that I'm not spotting in the audience? Okay, then I'll take my little 2-minute piece here. There are two things that went on from the warrior class that I'm really proud of. One was sharing the people's wolves. And we started sharing the people's wolves by making a wolf chart, which I think you're all familiar with. I was in Mike Phillips' office and suggested we do a pamphlet. And Mike had to call over to interpretation. The next thing I know, Mike is defending as best he can everything, that we are not to be allowed to publish that. We're not to be allowed to publish anything, and if anything ever gets published, it'll be somebody out of the inter division there. And Mike's arguing for all he's worth. Well, that kind of made me, let me put it this way, pissed me off. So I said, not only would we do the chart, we're going to do a book. So we did the Discovering Yellowstone Wolves. And this book has the history of the wolves in Canada coming down. It's also got the first set of directions on how people should be watching wolves. And it's still a good set to go with. That project has generated into the Wolf Fund over $10,000 from what people have bought, and the royalties come back. And tonight, we're going to commit to another $2,000 to Doug out of the Wolf Chart project. So you've got $2,000 there. Wolf Charts have bought 3 radio collars. One technically hasn't been put on yet over that time period, and that's all due to the Wolf Charts. The other thing was Bob Crabtree, I mean some of you will remember, and I and Mike sat down and we started figuring out what the first winter studies would be. And we picked out 3 people we thought we could get to help. Nathan was one of them. Dan McNulty. Dan contacted me this afternoon. He planned to be here tonight, but he couldn't make it because of driving. And Chase Davies, that's one that the newer folks don't know that name, but she worked out in the first study that year, and I worked out on it also. Doug arrived and developed winter study into this incredible research machine that we have today that has generated more knowledge about wolves probably than the collection of everything else about wolves in the world.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Winter studies are unbelievable. So that's my 2-minute piece. Anybody else?